Hello, everyone. For those who are watching us from from Singapore or from GMT plus 8, good afternoon. And for those who are watching us on different time zones, good morning, good evening, wherever you are. And thank you so much for joining us today. And because I've been doing this interview for over 100 times, so most probably most of you would know me. If not yet, then please go to my profile, visit my profile. Our company profile is also there. Our website is there, um, and find out more how we help leaders and organizations from around the globe to create successful outcomes through the co-creating, customizing, and contextualizing programs for them with our world-class resources. And obviously, it's important for you to know why we're doing this. And so, just to let you know that we would like to help leaders, and hopefully, through this conversation, we can add value to you to stay relevant and adapt to the next normal or whatever you want to call it. And of course, some companies are still, working on a hybrid setting or remote setting. So we hope this will be useful for you as well. And today it's my great pleasure to introduce Frank Tsuro. Frank is a leadership coach and speaker, has a vision to help people live fully from anywhere. He believes that through his mission of developing 100,000 honest leaders, he can make this a reality. He specializes in working with first generation leaders, helping them navigate the complex landscape of corporate leadership and develop an authentic leadership style rooted in self awareness, empathy, and self reflection. He is involved with a few organizations in the leadership and team development space. Amongst them is Frankly Speaking, a company he founded to help leadership teams work better together, thus creating better working environment. And without so much further ado, I'd like to invite Frank. Hi, Frank.
Hello, Marilyn. Hello, everyone.
I'm glad to have you here. Despite the introduction saying about very soft skills, or what I would call also as life skill around self awareness, empathy, and self reflection, the reason why I invited you here is because we enjoyed our conversation on Lunch Club, isn't it?
Yeah, I really did. I really did. And I'm looking forward to this one.
Yes, and it's interesting, like the way you have described what you do is so much on the soft skills, and yet what I've learned from you is like I'm so impressed with this guy who's talking about metrics, which is something that I have to improve on, data analytics, metrics, and all the numbers that you have to like incorporate in conversations with leaders, right? So just impressed with that.
Well, I must say, I'm a recovering accountant who got stuck in this space. Not more stuck. I suppose I'm very happy in this space. So numbers will always follow me.
Oh, no wonder, no wonder. So, having said that, please share with us your leadership experiences, your influencers, or if you even have a favorite leadership style that you use or you would recommend to your clients as well.
Well, I think my first recollection of leadership was probably when I joined, the Boy Scouts as a Cub Scout in primary
Oh,
school. And
wow.
so I started getting recognition before I really understood what recognition is. But people would say, "Oh, you're such a good leader." And I
Mhm.
remember in primary school when they chose the prefects, I didn't even expect that I'd be one of those people that would be chosen and to be the deputy head boy
Mhm.
in that year. It was a very big surprise. But
Mhm.
I think years later, and when I look back and reflected that, I think
Mhm.
one of the big things that defines me as an individual is I've always had a heart to serve. And maybe
Mhm.
that came from, my Cub Scout promise to think of others before yourself and to do a good turn every day. And I think, as we know from some of the leadership gurus, leadership is service. And I think that's what's defined my leadership base and, taken me on further. But I went on to corporate and I took on a number of managerial roles at a very young age. But I also got involved in the nonprofit space. And I remember when I first became a leader, I didn't plan to be, but someone came to me and said, Frank, we as people are naturally selfish people.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
so he says, let's assume that the life expectancy in the world was 80. So
Mhm.
he said something like, if a 50-year-old were to take leadership, they would probably subconsciously think, how do I make the next 30 years livable? And then if a
Mhm.
60-year-old took leadership, they would say, how do we make the next 20 years livable? And he said to me at the time, for you as a 20-year-old, you're probably thinking, how do we make the next 60 years possible? And ever since, I bought into that story and started getting involved. And so right now, as you may have had viewers from my introduction, I'm really
Mhm.
dedicated to growing 100,000 honest leaders. And the way I do that is almost all my affiliations, whether it's at Frankly Speaking, where we work with leadership teams, or it's at the Entrepreneurs Hub, where we build young micro entrepreneurs on
Mhm.
the African
Mhm.
continent, or anything that I do. I'm also a member of Toastmasters, which is in leadership development. My
Mhm.
alignments are in the leadership development space.
Mhm.
And so through my work in business, through the boards that I serve on, and through some other affiliations, that's really, the leadership experience that I've built over the years.
Wow, thank you for sharing that with us. And obviously, from your sharing, I would say that we both agree that leadership is about serving others, right? And being
Yes.
involved, as you've mentioned, in order to develop others and to help other leaders, whether they're entrepreneurs, business leaders, or corporate leaders, in order to fulfill their role as a leader by being much more empathetic, self-aware, and doing their reflection in order to know where do we move forward, how do we move forward, and even like how are we gonna be a better leader
Yes.
ourselves, right? So thank you so much for that sharing. And before I ask you the next question, I would like to invite those who are watching us live to join us in this conversation. It's not just about me asking Frank, but if you have like any aha moments, any questions, feel free to join us in this conversation, right? So, having said that, what do you believe are the top three problems that the leaders normally face, right? I mean, in the last 2.5 years, we had this pandemic that is still here, I would say, and a lot of people has experienced that. They call it new normal or the pre-pandemic, post-pandemic, and so, but for sure, even before that, leaders are already facing some principal problems, or like common problems in their daily work. So for you and based on your experience, what are those top three problems?
Well, I think fundamentally, the day I understood what leadership was, someone
Mhm.
pretty much explained the phrase, you manage
Mhm.
things and you
Mhm.
lead people. And I think
Yes.
that really, turned on the light bulb, because I was always juxtaposing the concept of leadership and management. And I've seen that in my work, a lot of leaders do struggle with that. A lot of those people are
Mhm.
technically brilliant at what they do, and when they get promoted, they probably think that they're promoted to keep doing the same thing that they're doing, and they don't
Mhm.
realize that they've got a people responsibility. And so, going into the first challenge, I think people have always struggled with the idea of saying something. So whether this is maybe saying, how do I communicate with my team? How do I
Mhm.
resolve conflict? How do I, make sure that everyone is in alignment with what we want to do? That's quite a
Mhm.
problem. And in this day and age, what I'm noticing is because of, the way teams are becoming more diverse and global, a
Mhm.
lot of leaders are struggling to navigate leading diverse and global teams. So that's what I would put out as pretty much the first challenge, to say, how do I lead people, which is resolving conflict, which is, the ability to inspire them and speak with confidence, or the
Mhm.
ability to improve your emotional intelligence, whatever it is. Then the second thing that I would take to is that, we're living in a very complex world. And I think
Mhm.
the whole concept of navigating that complexity, and from a strategy perspective, that horizon scanning, knowing how far in the future we should plan, and whether
Mhm.
we are actually ready for that future, and actually thinking what it is that we need to be doing, I think is a very big challenge. In fact, a lot of
True.
my clients are always afraid of disruption.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
that managing complexity will be the second thing that I'd earmark. And then the last thing that I think a lot of leaders are struggling with, outside of the leading diverse team and managing complexity, is the concept of adapting to change. So
Mhm.
maybe this is a bias because I'm in the behavioral coaching space, but that concept of adapting to change and teaching what you were doing. And sometimes I've also seen some other people maybe that are changing too fast before certain things take root, and maybe just changing and making unnecessary changes. That concept of dealing with change is a complexity that I found to be happening.
Mm. I really love how you started the top problems, which is explaining to us that you manage things and lead people, right? And again, that's, I think, where the problems or the mistakes is if you don't know about this, right? Or if you
Yeah.
don't pay attention to these, that it's important for you to like lead people instead of managing them, and that includes like
Yes.
communications, alignment, and setting all this right in order for you to be able to lead your team, and your business as well, right? And of course,
Yes.
managing complexities, despite that, we understand that everything is kind of complex. It's mainly because you're working with humans. There's
Yes. Yes.
always complexities, and now that the changes are getting faster and faster than usual, the changes in the technology, and like with the VUCA world, right, that we were referring to, there will always be complexities, and it's time for them to like expect it already and take that as an opportunity to manage those, right? And
Yes.
last but not the least, you've mentioned about adapting to change. Yes. And
Yes.
humans are always resistant to change, which is very interesting because from like when we are born until like we die, there will be changes in our life, whether it's physical, whether it's in the business, or in whatever things that we do. Even when we get married, it's a different change. When we
Yeah.
get when we have children, then that's a different change. And and somewhat more when you're working in organization where there will be like different perspectives, different ways of communications, and all those complexities put together, right? and
Yes.
and what's interesting is because before we even had this conversation, I had this training around operations manage and supply management. and
Mm.
and then one of the comment he said is that it change management is really difficult. And the reason why it happens is because I'm sure you will agree with this as well, is that because most of the time, right, even if like organizations or leaders would empower their team, sometimes this empowerment comes with responsibility where it's not it's not that inclusive, if I have to say that, right?
Okay.
Where um two things that I've learned just today, and it's like, oh yeah, is really like so much of like, okay, when you have that empowerment, you don't know like where or what are your boundaries, right? And
Mm.
at the same time, when you fail or when you make a wrong decision, you get fired or you have to pay for it, right?
Yes, yes. And I've noticed it particularly on this side of the world, in many parts of Africa where I do a lot of my work, where you
Mhm.
don't have those advanced economies that give you space to even fail. So that culture of failing is not there, which probably impacts on our ability to be
Mhm.
successful.
And also like in Asia, right? Like when you are empowered or you become a manager, or sometimes you get more responsibility and yet you don't get additional pay. And so it's really like, is it really empowerment in the end, right? It's like really
Yeah.
more responsibility, and not really like, I think the comment I said to our trainer is that, like, I think one of the problem is around psychological safety, because unless you let them pay,
Mm,
like let them play or let them fail, like what you've mentioned, and let them really, like, if you add on responsibilities and work to them, might as well consider, compensating that as well. So people
yes.
are really empowered and are so much more willing uh to change, right, or to adapt to
Mm,
it. And that goes back to your first comment or problem around communications and alignment, right?
yes.
So we don't want to leave our audience with this problem, right? We wanted to let them know, like, okay, so having said that, what are the important leadership capabilities and skills that you must have in order to continue to lead effectively, knowing that, we are already like facing similar or such problems, right?
Okay, maybe I'll offer a couple of suggestions and maybe based on the problems that I brought forward. So, with the first one, I think it's very important for you as a leader in your organization to almost be able to separate your management responsibilities and
Mm-hmm.
your leadership responsibilities, which is your
Mm-hmm.
tasks and your leadership. But since we're talking a lot more about leadership, one of the things I've always said to people, just from a language perspective, I think I know a leader is clear about what they're talking about when they avoid words like lead, communicate, and transform, and all that, and specify. So whenever I say I help people lead,
Mm-hmm.
I can replace the lead, because this is what leadership is. Leadership is
Mm-hmm.
resolving conflict.
Mm-hmm.
Leadership is the ability to connect with your teams and communicate clearly. Leadership is the ability to tell stories and inspire your audience. So I think it's important for us to break down this leadership so that we
Mm-hmm.
really understand
Mm-hmm.
what it is. I think in my opening story, I told you I didn't understand why people saw me as a leader,
Mm-hmm.
but it was because of my service. So leadership is service. So I think when you're able to break down,
Mm-hmm.
what constitutes a leader without
Mm-hmm.
maybe even using the word leader, I think you're actually able to be more effective as a leader and actually connect with your people. And suddenly
Mhm,
it makes sense why you need to get to know your team and
mhm,
how you actually get the leverage that you're able to use to motivate your team, which is also leadership. So that's the first thing that I would say. And then with managing complexity, one of the big concepts that I've been introduced to, which is a concept that came out of Harvard. I think it's a professor called Ronald Heifetz, and it's the
mhm,
concept of adaptive leadership. And
mhm,
so with adaptive leadership, I think when I started off in the strategy field some years ago, we used to do about 10, 15, 20, 30 year strategies, even though most of what I did was a 15-year strategy. But now,
mhm,
sometimes planning for the next 6 months is difficult, and so it really makes things very difficult. And so,
mhm,
one of the things that adaptive leadership does is, it's the ability to rely on your team as a strategy, and that's building a team of leaders that know how to deal with unknown situations. And where in the traditional leadership sense, information flows to the authority, In this case, authority flows to the people with the information, to the people who seem to know what's happening in that
Mhm.
particular field. Now, I come from a country where there's been a lot of hyperinflation and everything. And I
Mhm.
remember in one of the organizations that I worked with, it was a young 23-year-old that pretty much knew a solution to a very big problem that was being faced in the sector. And
Mhm.
what everyone in the company did, because they had created an adaptive leadership structure, is that
Mhm.
he became almost the leader to that project, and he led it until he hit a ceiling, and someone else on the team knew how to take it forward. And so authority kept moving to the person that knows. And I think
Mhm.
that's one way we can use to navigate complexity. And
Mhm.
then finally, when it comes to managing change, and I think specifically I said some people are adapting to change slowly and some very fast. I was intrigued by a conversation I had by one of the senior leaders in the mobile technology industry.
Mhm.
And when you look at mobile phones 5 years ago and mobile phones today,
Mhm.
there's just a big change in what's happened. However, I know this year alone, being an Apple fan, we were complaining that the change between the iPhone 13 and the iPhone 14 is quite minimal. There's
Mhm.
very little change. However, when you look at it over a period of time, there's actually a massive difference. And what I learned is this technology industry or this mobile telephone industry, some of these companies seem to have
Mhm.
a change model, an incremental change model. And so I'd like to encourage leaders to actually
Mhm.
create, a change model that allows them to incrementally change things and not necessarily change too fast, because sometimes you need time for something to settle in and to actually profit from an idea before, rather than just changing models. I mean, it's like tantamount to buying every model of a new phone that comes through. I don't think that's necessary. Maybe you can go for a year or two or three with the same phone, and by the time you do your next upgrade, then it makes a lot of business sense to do that. So I think that's the same that I'd definitely advise.
Wow, thank you so much for giving us more clarity and answering the problems that you have raised earlier. Again, it's really about connecting with people. I really love that part because, again, you're working with humans and it's about uh, adding value. It's about um, building trust, building relationships, right? And being able to resolve those conflicts that you face within the organization. And that happens because, I mean, we have different perspectives, we have different personalities, right? And
Yeah.
it's so impossible for us not to have like differences. And so it's really so much around like working on this, communicating, right? Like what you've said, that's the key in order to be able to resolve these conflicts that you mentioned. And again, I'm flashing the summary. Also, adaptive leadership, like what you've mentioned, it's relying on team to help handle unknown challenges, and it's really depending on the floor uh, leadership, right? Because they're the one who's facing the customer, they're the one who's facing the challenges, the problems in along the way, right? And
Mm.
it's really like so much on leveraging who understand most the challenges or the issues that comes out, and getting those insights from them. And last but not the least is the incremental change model that you made mention. And again, it's really like, the reason why we make changes is because, of course, our goal is really to improve, to make things easier for each and everyone. But if we never communicate that before we implement that, again, that's gonna be difficult, right? And it
Yes.
and it's interesting like how you have actually described that and gave an example with Apple, right? But from these experiences that you've shared in the last three questions, can you give us like a story or example why you chose these three? I mean, I'm sure there are more problems that, and even like leadership capabilities that you can share. Like, why these three?
Well, I think firstly it's the most prevalent. So, like I said, my career evolved. I actually got involved in coaching by accident.
Mhm,
I'm a member of an organization called Toastmasters, and a friend
mhm,
of mine knew that I was a Toastmaster and said, "Hey, you're
mhm,
the Toastmaster. Please help me with my dissertation presentation." And
mhm.
I didn't realize that after helping him, he was going to show it to his class, which had quite a number of other executives. And so that's pretty much how
Okay.
I got in as a speech coach for executives. And then it evolved to business strategy until I started doing, a lot of executive work. And then I thought, I really love people, which is how I got into the leadership space. But
Mhm,
like I
mhm,
said, the first thing that I really see, or at base level, is that a lot of these people are good accountants, good
mhm,
lawyers,
mhm,
but no one seems to help them understand when they transition that when you get promoted into leadership, it's less about you doing the task and
mhm,
you helping other people and creating an environment
mhm,
for other people to thrive. And so
mhm,
I know fundamentally that people have always struggled with that. Sometimes they've always struggled with their personalities. They've always struggled with the leadership style. And I know you asked me this question in the first one, but
mhm,
generally, I'm not a very big fan of prescribing to someone to use a certain leadership style. I always
mhm,
feel that based on your being, your character, and your
mhm,
values, you can
mhm,
create your own leadership style that works,
mhm,
through experience and through many other things. And so when we talk about the world we live in today, it's
mhm,
not just now about managing teams. The teams are
mhm,
becoming even more diverse. So you need to be culturally sensitive. You need to be
mhm.
sensitive to a lot of other things. And so that's why I chose the first one around leading diverse teams. But at the same time, we also live in a very crazy world. I know some futurists have said that in this decade alone, we might experience more change than we've ever experienced in our entire world. So the concept of managing complexity and managing change, I think, becomes a very handy skill for a leader here today. So that's why I chose those challenges.
Wow, thank you so much for sharing and summarizing that for us. And again, I'm so delighted that you've mentioned that it's really about working on what you have, who you are, what's your personality like, what's your core values like in choosing how you actually lead your team, right? I
Yeah.
remember that because I just came from a mastermind retreat this weekend, and so this is one of the first sessions we had, really so much more about the understanding your core values in order to have those core values really like walk the talk or permeate to all the things that you do, the decisions that you make, the goals and intentions that you create as well, right? So thank you so
Yes.
much for reminding us. I mean, I think sometimes some people do forget about that, right? And I had that interesting conversation, like one of the leaders actually asked that HR leader, why did you hire humans? You're supposed to hire employees. Isn't that funny? Like, and
The
annoying at the same time, right?
same time.
So what does that mean for you,
Mm.
right? So that's a very interesting comment from their leader. And like, oh, where's the core value? What core value is he transferring to the team and like to their business, right? So
Mm.
like, wow, that's why it's really like important to really understand your core values. And before I ask you the last question, I just like to thank Oh, some of the people who like us on Facebook, Social Security Disability Benefits. Wow, this is, I think, an organization, right? And then
Yeah.
Pin Ayako. I don't think that's her real name, but thank you so much for giving us a like. And for those who will watch us on a replay, feel free to put your comments, your questions, and even your aha moments after this or during this conversation. So, and that leads me to my last question to you. I know this is a very open question, which I would normally refer to as the Miss Universe question. So, if this is your chance to do that, to answer
Okay.
this, So if you have a magic wand and can use it, what will you do with it?
Well, I think that's easy for me. I come from a beautiful country that's been ravaged by poor leadership. And I
Mhm,
think until recently, I didn't realize the impact. A lot of people have had to emigrate because not because of personal choice, but to make ends meet. And so when I
mhm,
was growing up in high school and seeing some of my friends not have their family with them, I think it affected me. And I always had this dream inside me that I wish people could live fully from anywhere, and
mhm,
someone chose to emigrate to somewhere, it was not because of economic reasons, but
mhm,
because of choice. And
mhm,
so, after a while, and having gotten involved in various leadership circles, I thought
mhm,
to myself, if at all we could just
mhm,
develop honest leaders, I think
mhm,
this world would be a whole lot different. And I know not all the problems would be solved, but
mhm,
I believe this world has enough for everyone. And
mhm,
if only we are honest enough and not corrupt and we're ethical in our decision making, I believe
mhm,
that we could cater for everyone. And so for me, if I had a magic wand, I would definitely instill honesty in many of our leaders. And I know this is something that started in my continent in Africa, but many people I've spoken to have said, we could do with some honest leaders on this side of the world. And I know
mhm.
this is a global challenge that could certainly transform the world. So that's what I would do, instill honesty in our leadership. And I think that would create a better society and a better culture.
I really wish that you have that magic wand with you. But I mean, like, I really appreciate you with all the insights that you have shared today, like how it has been helpful for me and for sure with our audience, like how we need to be mindful, right, of all these values, this character, and being honest as well, right? And
Yeah.
we do expect our leaders to have the integrity, to be honest, right?
Yes.
And so, but for sure with the work that you do, that's already like how you are building those generations, right, of leaders to be able to live and lead with honesty. So thank you so much for that work. And before we end this conversation, is there anything more that you'd like to leave our audience with?
Well, I'd just like to say, I think it's important for you as a leader just to always do your best to make a difference, because
Mhm.
there's someone somewhere out there relying on hearing your story, relying on your inspiration, relying on your encouragement to really change their lives. And I
Mhm.
think never underestimate the power that you have as a leader to transform people's lives and to
Mhm.
transform society. So that's pretty much what I would like to say. Thank you so much for having me. And yeah, it's been lovely being here.
Wow, thank you so much for that message. I really appreciate your insights, your reminders. It has been really helpful. I'm actually taking notes while we're having this conversation. And I would say this is really like an add value conversation and a great reminder for leaders to encourage them to make a difference, again like what you've said, that they should never underestimate their power as a leader, because it's affecting lives, it's affecting others, right? So thank you so
Mm.
much, Frank, for taking time to have this conversation with me. And for those who are watching us live, thank you so much for joining us and for supporting us. And just just to remind you again that we can do something. We all have the opportunity to create this world to be a better place to live in. So remember to invest in yourself always. And with that, we would like to leave you with this quote from Dolly Parton, that if your action create a legacy that inspires others to dream more, learn more, do more, and become more, then you are an excellent leader. Thank you, Frank, for being an excellent leader. And thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Have a good day and bye for now.
Bye bye.